About 6 months ago, I noticed, probably like many of you did, that some YouTubers were getting Hasselblads in exchange for making videos. And I quietly watched from a distance thinking, damn, that is pretty sick. When is my name gonna be on that list? Anyway, I heard nothing for a few months. I forgot about it, cried a little bit, and then got on with my life. However, fast forward to November, I got the email, and I'm pretty sure you know where this is going. This right here is the Hasselblad X2D with the 38mm lens. Let's talk about it. Before I dive into my thoughts, experiences, and opinions on the kit, let's go and take some photographs. And I want to show you some footage here from a beautiful frosty Sunday morning walk around my local area. And as casual and as easygoing as this walk was, I think I got some of my favorite photographs since I've had the Hasselblad. So let's do it. That morning walk was super unexpected, but when the light hits in winter like that, it is just perfect. The next couple of clips and photographs I'm going to show you are from when I first received the Hasselblad X2D. And I went into London, and once again, I was blessed with some really nice light, end of autumn, early winter vibes. So here's the very first day when I received the Hasselblad. moving into late December, I headed up north to see my family over Christmas, and I took the Hasselblad with me. And I don't know if you can remember, but in the UK, we had this crazy fog for about 3 or 4 days across the whole country. And even though I had the flu over Christmas, so I didn't get out as much as I'd like, I did head out for one evening walk when it was super cinematic and atmospheric. So here's what that looked like. To kick things off for 2025, I wanted to shoot the New Year's Day parade in London. And every year since I've been interested in photography, I've just missed this event. I've had other things going on. Or actually, because it's the 1st of January, I'm probably just hungover. I wanted this year to be different, so on the 1st of January, I picked the Hasselblad up and we headed into town. And even though it was a disgusting day, I mean, super windy and cold and wet, I think I got some okay images and I enjoyed the event. So POV style, GoPro on my chest, here's what that day looked like through the Hasselblad. let's dive into my thoughts and experiences using this beast. And that is exactly what it is. The title of this video might have alluded to what I think about this camera, but genuinely, it might be the best camera I've ever used. And let me explain what I mean by best, because that might be subjective and different from person to person. It might be the best camera I've ever used, both image quality and build quality. The files this thing produces blows my mind. Editing the raw files in Lightroom is such a wonderful experience. The colors are beautiful. The detail the 100 megapixel sensor captures is pretty crazy. And generally speaking, editing these raw files is a great thing. I wouldn't ever say that about editing raw files before. For me, editing my photographs is just part of the process and I will do it, but I don't love it. However, with the Hasselblad X2D, I look forward to looking through the raw files and tweaking and editing and just playing around because the files are so good. I will dive into Lightroom in this video so you can see what the files look like and how I would edit them as well. Before I continue raving about this camera, I want to keep this as straight talking as possible. And even though it's the best camera I've ever used, it isn't my favorite. And there's just a couple of things I think that are worth noting. This might not surprise many of you, but for street photography, this camera just is not ideal. It's not poor in its performance, but it's not exactly quick on its feet. From turning the camera on, the autofocus, and just operating the camera, generally speaking, is not as agile as perhaps using a smaller rangefinder style camera, which I'm used to. And I mean, obviously, it's a medium format. It's a bigger camera. This should really go without saying, but I just want to make it obvious that this wouldn't be my go-to for street photography. However, landscapes, portraits, fine art, anything with serious intention, this camera is going to really shine. I mean, even just a frosty morning walk like I had the other day, it produces the most beautiful photographs I've ever seen. But for fast-paced or even a casual day out doing street, it's just probably not the go-to. A quick note on portraits there. A few of us as street photographers are actually going to hire out a studio in a couple of weeks and play around with portraits in a studio environment. And I know this is where the Hasselblad is going to shine. So I'm really looking forward to see what results I can get. I don't know if regular viewers of the channel will be able to tell, but from the footage and these street photographs I've taken with the Hasselblad, you might be able to notice that they are slightly different to my usual style work. I'm actually leaning into the camera's restrictions a little bit because it's on the slower side. It's not sluggish, it's not bad in its performance, it's just not rapid. I was taking photographs of things a bit more intentionally and less reactive and more observational and things I could take my time with. And when I did get those photographs, there's a couple of photographs I've taken in London, they are stunning and I love the way they came out. And again, I'm going to reference the raw files. They are so much fun to edit. But for quick, nimble, run and gun on the streets, yeah, not my first option. I debated even bringing this up, the conversation about the speed of the camera, because it's obvious, it's a medium format 100 megapixel piece of kit. It's going to behave like that. So other than the speed of the camera, I cannot fault this camera at all. It is so much fun to use. And with that being said, let's dive into Lightroom now and flick through a couple of images and edit them so you can see what my process is like and how the files perform. I want to show you 4 different photographs here and I will quickly edit them so you can see what the files are capable of. This one taken in Piccadilly, you might have seen the original or the final version looks something like this, cropped quite heavily to focus on the waiter and the snowflake covering his face. Zooming in here, I focused on the snowflakes. I think you can see how much quality or how much detail is captured here. It's pretty phenomenal. You can see this was shot at 1,000th of a second at f4, 200 ISO, so pretty perfect camera settings if you ask me for a clean shot like this. Let's quickly show you what lifting the shadows would look like. You can probably see me there in the reflection. If I bring down the highlights, that is like the ultra HDR look. I definitely do not want that, so let's lean into the contrast a little bit, lower the highlights, lower the shadows, increase the contrast, maybe even bring the exposure up a little bit. I set the white balance, I set it in camera to cloudy, I think, so all the images that day were taken at 7,500 white balance. I would probably bring it down a little bit, lower the clarity just to soften it, maybe bring the vibrance up. I probably wouldn't do too much else. If I wanted to do some of my typical edits, I would add some yellow, orange to the highlights, and maybe add some teal / green to the shadows. Something like that looks pretty nice. And if this was too clinical, if this was, you know, kind of too nice on the eyes, if that makes sense at all, maybe add some grain just for a bit of texture, and you can see what that does a little bit. But I don't think we need to for this image. I want to keep it clean. The light is beautiful, and I'm pretty happy with that. Jumping over to the beautiful frosty morning walk a few days ago, I've been loving the 16:9 ratio for this, giving it that film look, basically making the photograph appear wider. I'm not overly keen on the original aspect ratio just because I feel like there's too much, and limiting a bit of context might help with the story. Not too much, but we don't need all this up here, I don't think. So let's focus in on this cross here, because this is beautiful. The light coming in from over here is stunning as well. I think it's worth noting how overexposed this is, but how nice the highlights roll off in the distance. And the fog might have something to do with that, easing off those bright highlights, but let's just move the highlight around so you can see how nice it is. Even at 100% highlight over here, this still looks okay. Really impressed with how the highlights appear, generally speaking, in most photographs that I've overexposed with the Hasselblad. But bring the exposure down slightly, definitely warm this photograph up, because that's the vibe of the image. Really cool. Lower the clarity just a tad, bring up the vibrance just a little bit, zoom in a little bit more so we can really pixel peep. Look at the detail here. I've never seen frost like that on a gravestone before. This is, yeah, really impressive. I like all this in the foreground. I think this is nice. But just for the sake of demonstration, let's zoom into this here. What if we went for something like that? And a note on the ISO, all the photographs I'd taken on this morning specifically, I had the ISO set to 3200, which was a complete mistake by me. Obviously it was very early in the morning, but it didn't matter because all the photographs came out so cool. I was concerned that would have been an issue, but then when I really thought about it, it doesn't matter at all. You can see a little bit of noise there in the shadows of the tree that is being backlit, but when you view it like this, it's absolutely beautiful. So let's crop back out, go back to our 16:9. Yeah, something like this. Let's simply apply that exact setting to this shot. Beautiful. But I think, ironically, I do prefer that full aspect ratio, getting the full image in. I think the way I composed it in camera was ideal. I don't want to change too much about this. Checking out the highlights again, I love how the glow kind of rolls off the shadows and the darkest points. The contrast is just stunning, so maybe even lean into that a little bit more. If I were to do something with the highlights, lean into the orange, maybe even add some reds in the shadows as well, like give it that warm glow. Maybe add some grain, just so there's a little bit of texture. Yeah, this is one of my favorite photographs I've taken recently, and I've spent, 90 seconds editing this, and I want to spend more time editing it because it just looks so cool. Jumping into this street photograph here, you can see it's slightly out of focus. It may be focused a little bit closer, and then I moved as I was walking by, so maybe the autofocus didn't track exactly, but I do like this vibe, and I like the darkness around our subjects, especially the fact that we can't see their eyes. Kind of leans into that mysterious vibe. So I'm going to lower the exposure a little bit, but bring the highlights up and the whites, just to increase that contrast between our subjects and all this texture and their background. And that orange backlit or backlight from the pub behind them really is nice. So warm the photograph up a little bit more. Add some texture just because it is slightly out of focus. So we'll just add a little bit of texture to offset that, and then lower the clarity just so it's not too sharp. I kind of do that with all my images. Maybe bump the vibrance up a little bit like I do with most of my images. And honestly, I don't really want to do too much. Just for demonstration purposes, if I did want to lift the shadows or drop the shadows completely, that's what it would look like. And same with the highlights. Lots of latitude, and I really don't want that HDR look. So I tend to lean into the shadows or against the shadows, however you want to see it. I kind of want to increase the contrast in these type of images. So really happy with this. This camera performs in low light situations incredibly well, and I thought with a medium format sensor, 100 megapixels, that when you start getting into the range of high ISO numbers, that the noise could look quite messy. And I found with other cameras that the higher the megapixels, sometimes the ISO is more obvious when you start bumping that number up. I'll show you some photographs on screen. Using this in low light was really impressive. You might have been able to tell from some of the pictures in this video, but I was leaning into cropping super wide, like 16:9 type resolution. Just because of how impressive the files are, I wanted to create more of a filmic look. I wanted that big wide, almost atmospheric feeling to the photographs. Instead of maybe my usual raw, gritty street stuff, I wanted to lean into the quality of the files and get those big vistas and more of those, show more of the atmosphere, I think. Because I know of how capable the camera is, I was leaning into that in the editing process as well. And I really love how some of these photographs look as a wide 16:9. I could just stand here and tell you how amazing the images are that this camera produces, but what is the camera actually like in your hands? Let's quickly talk about build quality. The grip is substantial and feels solid. All the buttons are responsive and have that nice haptic feedback. The screen looks as good as my iPhone, honestly. It's the best screen I've ever seen on a camera before. However, tilting the screen is slightly limiting, and the viewfinder does actually overlap the screen a little bit to restrict your view. And I did notice that a few times using the tilt. The EVF is outstanding, but it does take a second when looking at the screen and bringing the camera to your eye to switch between them. And back to my earlier point, it's just slightly slow to react. However, when you do look through the EVF or when you do use the screen, it's the best I've ever seen. Basically, anything that is physically important on a camera, the X2D does it to the highest standard I've seen. And even changing the battery is a wonderful experience. A quick note on the battery life. If you are shooting all day, then I think 2 batteries is probably a good idea, as this thing does produce 200 megabyte files. Every time you press the shutter button, the battery does drain, but that makes sense. Just quickly talking about the XCD 38mm lens, which is roughly about 30mm full frame equivalent. Its build quality matches the standard of the X2D body, and also I did thoroughly enjoy the manual focus option you get from moving the focus ring. Just generally very tangible and effective ergonomics right there. If you have any questions about the X2D, then please do leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you. Although remember, I've only had this camera 2.5 months, so I don't know everything, but I will do what I can. Thank you again to Hasselblad for sending this beautiful piece of kit, and I cannot wait to see what kind of images this thing can create for me, as it is certainly on a different level of image quality than what I'm typically used for. So I'm going to be traveling with this. I'm going to take more portraits, perhaps more landscapes. I'm excited to see what I can make with it. So thank you to Hasselblad. I think this might be the best camera I've ever used.